right, so Sehaj Sethi is an accomplished screenwriter and producer, and I've had the pleasure of knowing Sehaj since our undergrad days. And even then, her creativity and vivacious personality made it clear she was going places. Currently, Sehaj is working on a TV adaptation of the novel City of Ghosts by David Lowery for Fox Searchlights, but Sehaj's CV contains a long list of impressive grants, awards, exhibitions, and productions. Her work tends toward horror and the macabre, but it's been a joy to watch her work and her career expand over the years. So I'm super thrilled that you're able to chat with me today, Sehaj.
I am so thrilled that you asked me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm going to dive right in and start with some of the questions that my students had for you, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Great.
So my class is actually a lot of fiction writers and students who are interested in film writing, hence me asking you. And that's not my wheelhouse. So I was like, I have to have help with this. So I had lots of really interesting questions about writing and the industry. So when you first started writing, did you transition into script writing, or was it something that you've always done?
Definitely a transition. As you remember, Illinois Wesleyan was really good at creative writing and had a really lovely program for that. And at that time, I was really just into prose. I've been writing since I was a kid, really. And most of it was, what people normally write, when they're teenagers or elementary school kids, is stories, just, short stories. I like to say that I tried my hand at a novel when I was 12 and I gave up at like page 42, I think. But screenwriting really came about because of an interest in film. So I took a couple classes in high school that just made me realize, oh my goodness, I really, really love, not just the writing of it, but editing, cinematography, the whole process of making a film. And so I actually, after graduating with my BA in creative writing from Illinois Wesleyan, I immediately went to the NYU grad film program, which really is very holistic. It covers everything. You're directing films, you're editing them, you're helping produce other people's films. And it was really in that program that I realized, first of all, I missed writing. I missed, doing that side of my, exercising that creative bone. And then I realized, actually, this could be possibly a career for me. So it was probably 3 years into my graduate program that I finally really started focusing on screenwriting, and pretty much been focusing on it since.
Amazing. Thank you. So does the script writing change the way you think about your surroundings? My students wanted to know. And they said, for example, viewing the world in scenes or imagining how you would put different things that happen into a screenplay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it really changes how I watch a film. It's very easy for me now to kind of decipher, almost in like an unfortunate way. Like if I notice a shot in something, I'll be like, that's going to be important later, probably in 20 minutes. You get very used to certain rhythms in film and TV if you are writing them. I've always, I think, looked at the world differently as a writer. I think even before I got into screenwriting, you just get, I think when you're a writer, you tend to be really observant and you just kind of take in a lot. So I think I've always had that skill. And now that, writing really is my career, I definitely try to make that more valuable. Like if there's something that happens, I half jokingly say to a lot of people, I'm putting that in a script. Because there's just, there's things you just come across that can be really valuable, even in small ways. I think the one thing that's really nice about screenwriting is so many bits of it have to be just little moments. So I don't have to look for massive, themes in the world all the time. I can just look for a funny joke. I can just look for a line that I find really interesting. That's happened quite a few times, actually. Someone's given me a line, they've just said something that I find really interesting. I'll jot it down and it becomes a piece of dialogue and one of my characters nods later.
Yeah, I think a lot of writers we're good eavesdroppers, right?
Very scary to be a friend of ours.
Yes, absolutely. And like observing the weirdest things. I know I'll be in conversations with people where I will notice something and they're like, I never noticed that before, just tiny things about the world. So absolutely. People watchers, eavesdroppers, we're the weirdos.
100%. I'm sure you have this too. I'll be at dinner and people will be talking to me. I'm like, can you just wait a second? The couple next to us is breaking up and I just really need to listen to this. This is very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So my students noticed that a lot of the work on your website, as they put it, follows darker or outright horror tones. And they wondered if that was your favorite genre, or is that just what you get hired to write? And if it isn't your favorite, what is? So can you talk a little bit about like where your interests lie?
Yeah, I mean, I do love horror. It's one of my, I love, it's very fun. And, I think good horror actually has a really, it's really important to have character work. So I did start leaning towards that early on in my career because it does tend to be a pretty, I don't know if I want to say profitable area, but it's an area that's always needs more voices. So a lot of my representatives were, very happy that I liked horror because it was something that I could, very easily find avenues in, get meetings for, et cetera. And, to be honest, it's an area that only recently has had voices of color. So I think that that was really interesting to people, that I wasn't, a typical, point of view on a genre that is already quite popular. But to be honest, I will say, like, I don't actually follow specific genres. I've pretty much worked in almost every genre. I really focus on character. If my stories always have to have a really compelling character for me, and then from there I'll build whatever world I need to build around them. But yeah, I definitely tend to like darker stuff. that has been a good area for me.
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting. I've had you're the third guest speakers for this class, and every single one of you has said, yeah, I've written in this thing, or I've done this thing, but actually I don't really like to kind of pigeonhole myself right into a genre. And I find that very hopeful. I think it's really cool that writers are hopefully going to be able to not get pigeonholed like that. I think some of the novelists I talked to have said that they have their first thing that they published kind of creates like almost a brand for themselves, but in the second book they wanted to do something very different, and they kind of had to fight a little bit to not do the same thing over and over again. And I think actors get to do that a lot. Like, we're impressed when actors can bend genres, or like are able to be dramatic over here and comedic over here, and we like really praise that. But it seems like sort of in the writing world, we're still expecting people to stick to their genre. So I think it's interesting that this generation of writers is like, no, I can do whatever I want.
No, you're 100% right. I think that there's I think people forget that, like, at the end of the day, I like to consider myself creative, but at the same time, it's a commodity in a way. And when you get to that point of, oh, this is going to be made, this is something that someone wants to hire you for, there's an element of, well, how are you, like, I've seen that you're good at this one area. I feel safe putting you in that box. And a lot of it is, unfortunately, the me putting my own effort in. Someone's not going to hire me for, sweeping fantasy if they haven't seen that that's already something that I can do. And that's what I started doing. Was I took the time to, outside of like whatever work I was being hired to do, my own work, I was like, you need to be excited about this, and you're not excited about horror right now. So I would start writing things that I started realizing I really liked just magical realism in general. And so I started writing things towards that end that weren't necessarily dark. They were just not grounded in reality.
Yeah.
And I started getting hired for stuff like that. So it was kind of, I think, to your point, I think writers now are realizing, let me take that step. Let me experiment on my own. And I'm doing like literally what your students are probably doing. I'm just sitting in front of a computer with a blank screen and being like, I have to write something. And there's no professional, there's no, machine behind me. It's just me, my work. It's just my mind. What do I want to write?
Yeah.
And that really has helped guide my career to be not just one area. So now, I mean, I just worked on a show that was like supernatural-y and, in tone, but I'm now working on something that's really fantasy based and in animation. And, I have something that's in sci-fi. And thankfully, because I've taken the time to really broaden myself as a writer, just for me, honestly, now people are realizing that and being receptive to it and being like, oh, we can put her for a bunch of stuff.
That's great. That's awesome. That makes you a lot more, more people will want to hire you, right? Because you've got all of these different things. You would think that learning about all of those different genres, it would feed into just being a better writer in general, right?
Yeah.
Do you, I'm going totally off script now.
Good.
So, obviously you're a filmmaker, so obviously you're going to be watching films and thinking about films in a certain way. What kinds of things do you read? Like, do you read for pleasure as well?
Yeah, as much as I can.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
I really, really try to. I actually tend to read a lot of nonfiction because it's something that is just outside of what I do, and I really love it.
Yeah.
So I read a lot of narrative nonfiction. I will say the last couple of years, it's a lot of articles, just news articles, and think pieces of that kind, which I think we're all doing.
Yeah.
But I will say every now and then I also just read some really lovely fiction that I just get introduced to. There's a phenomenal Japanese author that I've really enjoyed called Yoko Ogawa, who's beautiful. She wrote a book called The Memory Police, which I highly recommend. Like literally everyone should read it. It's a really gentle sort of sci-fi dystopian, but like in a really beautiful way. So funny enough, actually, in the last couple of years, it took a couple of years for me to get back into reading, to be honest. Yeah. I was so focused on writing, so focused on work. And only recently have I remembered how just blissful it is to start a book you really love, that you didn't know you were going to love, and then just read it for like hours. So that a couple times.
Yeah, same. I think it was really hard for me to read for years when I first started teaching, because I was my whole day was with words. Just like your whole day is with words. You're reading, you're writing stuff, you're thinking about words. For me, it was like talking to students about words and reading essays. So it took me a long time to go, oh yeah, you can really enjoy this and get swept away by it too. And it's lovely. It's totally lovely. And I love that you're reading stuff that's very separate from the kinds of things that you create. I do the same. I absolutely do the same. I read things that have nothing, that I do not write. And I find it very fulfilling. Yeah.
I love it.
All right, cool. So back to my students' question. So obviously they're interested in stuff about the industry. I'm sure you get asked questions about the industry a lot, because a lot of people are kind of like excited about filmmaking and all of that. But I thought my students had some pretty good questions. They wanted to know, first of all, do you get to be present for the filming of your scripts?
It really depends. So I will say features, feature, which is like movies, full-length movies, and TV work very differently. In the feature world, the screenwriters, I don't want to say lower on the totem pole, but the director really reigns supreme in that world. So they kind of dictate what kind of access they want the screenwriter to have, or if they want them on. There's a lot of feature films that don't have a writer at all on set. For TV work, it's usually very different. In TV, the writer is actually kind of king, and they're kind of dictating most of what's happening. So your class and you might have heard the term like showrunner for a TV show, which means it's the person who's heading the show. Mm-hmm. Those people are almost always writers. And they're the ones who kind of dictate everything. So in TV, it's much more common to have a writer on set for filming episodes. Part of that is because everything has started with the writer's room, with all the writers who have been writing. So writers tend to have to dictate to a director, like, hey, this is how this character works. This is how this character works. Oh, actually, this moment in the script is really important. We have to make sure we get that, a different take. So it's very dependent. I have done a lot of development work in features. None of my features have gone to be filmed yet, so I don't know. I have a feeling I would actually probably, if I was just the writer, if I wasn't a producer on it or the director, obviously, yeah, there's a very good chance I wouldn't be asked to be on set. A huge part of it is just money and time. When I write a feature, it's months to maybe a year before they film it, and by that time, they might say, hey, are you free? And I'm like, no, I'm doing 3 more other jobs. It's very different on filmmaking for movies, what kind of access you might have to a writer when you actually get to the point of filming it. TV is very different. I won't bore you guys with how the landscape has totally changed, but broadcast TV, which is what I've done a bit of, which broadcast means like NBC, ABC, CW, those kind of channels. You tend to be writing scripts and filming them at the same time. So, for example, I was writing my episode of the show that I was that I'm on currently, actually, The Winchesters, which is like the prequel to Supernatural, which I have no idea if you're anyone in your class watches that show. Kind of an oldie, but I was writing my episode. We started figuring out my episode, I think, in July. I was on set end of August, and I was there for. I had to be there a little longer than my episode took a little longer than other episodes, so I was there for 3 weeks, and we were shooting in New Orleans. So I was there the whole time. The showrunner, puts on the writer of each episode, hey, this is your episode. Make sure that we're getting, the emotional beats we need. Make sure that the characters are acting the way we need them to act. And so it was my job to work with the director to be like, ooh, he was acting kind of like upset in this line, but he's actually really meant to be like, amused or something. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you are catching everything that the script needs, that our story needs to catch. And you're kind of, you're certainly not policing, but you're there to be both a resource to the crew and to the director and to the actors, but you're also meant to be there to make sure that everything that is meant to be in the story gets to be caught. So that's a very long-winded way to say, yes, for TV, I have been on set for filming. For features, not so much.
Yeah. No, thank you for making that distinction. That's amazing information. So you mentioned the writer's room. We've all heard that term, the writer's room. And I'm curious about how that has shifted since COVID and telecommuting and all of that. Like, have you ever been in the situation where you're actually in a room with other writers, and now do you do it separately from wherever you're at, or what does that look like right now?
So I've done both, and I've done them funny enough, I've had a room that started in person and then went to remote. I've had rooms that stayed remote the entire time. I've had rooms that were hybrid, and I spent some time in person, some time in remote. So I've kind of run the gamut at this point. There's definitely a difference, but I will say, to be honest, it's not as big a difference as people think. It was being in person is lovely because you're chatting and everything, and you get to talk to people, and there's possibly a little more camaraderie because you're just physically there. But I will say it tends to take longer. Like, you're there for hours, and that was kind of the infamous way that writers' rooms used to work. That you'd be there for from 10 in the morning to midnight to 2 a.m. And I think the one thing that's really helped with remote work is realizing, oh, we don't need to do that. We can actually do so when I was in person, it was like a regular 8, sometimes 9 or 10 hour day. In Zooms, I've never had longer than a 4-hour day, wow. Maybe 4. And the funny thing is the output doesn't change at all. You actually get more efficient when you're working in this style. Because you have to, you're all looking at each other. It's like, let's get to work. Let's do this. And you get excited. You're still pitching ideas. You're still thinking of things together. You're still laughing together. Mm-hmm. There's still a sense of the room being one unit. I personally love having remote rooms. I'm thrilled with them. Not just because I don't live anywhere near LA right now. I do actually think, this is me being a little bit on my soapbox. I think it equalizes the industry in a way that we haven't had before. Before the last few years, it was required you live in LA to be a TV writer. You could be a feature writer anywhere, but you had to live in LA if you wanted to work in TV. Right. And, it's not just the last 10 years, it's the last 30, 40 years. LA has just become one of the most inaccessible, cities to live in. And so it's quite a burden to put on a writer, especially new writers, to say, hey, spend $4,000, $3,000 a month on rent, work on a show that maybe comes back next year, touch wood, you're hoping. It's a lot. It's a lot. So what happens is that, not surprisingly, that pool got smaller and smaller as to who writers were available in this physical city to work with. Yeah. The really nice thing about remote work is I can get, a lovely, Black writer from New Orleans who, has, 3 kids, but he's an amazing person who works in fantasy. Or I can get like a phenomenal native writer in Oklahoma or something. You open your pool so much more when you allow people to not have to have that burden. Yeah. So I've actually really very much highly promoted rooms. I'm possibly actually going to be heading a room in sometime next year. We'll see. And I've already said, I want to make it remote, not just for my sake and for, the sake of me just having a newborn that I'm dealing with, right, but for the sake of my other writers. I want to be able to look at work and not at, specifically, who can, has the advantage and the privilege to be able to live in this one place.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because you're right. It's a huge burden. It's paying tons of rent and then just essentially being willing to starve.
Yes.
Until your career gets off the ground, Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way before, but that's spot on. That's so absolutely right.
So fingers crossed, this stays this way. We'll see.
Well, I kind of think there's not a whole lot. We're not going back, Even here on campus, the union, the teachers, our faculty union has just kind of forced in our last contract that all meetings should have a remote option, that we shouldn't have to be on campus to attend those meetings, because frankly, the attendance goes up when it's Zoom capable.
100%.
And I commute into work, so absolutely, I'm much more willing to attend a voluntary college forum if I can do it from home.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just for economic reasons. It's like there's a reason why women haven't really up until the last 5 or 6 years, women who wanted to have families were kind of shunned from rooms quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because it was assumed that they couldn't do the job because they'd have their families to take care of. So yeah, to your point, it makes it easier across the board, really.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah. Cool. And you're perfectly. It's fine to get on your soapbox as much as you want in this conversation. You have brilliant things to say, and I love it. Okay, so this is an interesting question from a student. What is it like watching things and knowing you had a hand in writing in the writing process? What does that feel like?
It's both really, it's very gratifying, obviously. It's also really humbling because, especially when it comes to TV, my name will show up on an episode that I wrote, but, like we were talking about The Room, every episode of, if a TV show is written with a writer's room format, where that means several writers are working together, it's very humbling to know that this was not all me, this was, 6 people who helped me, shape this story. The showrunner has, given his or her, directives and thoughts and, written things in as well. And it just makes me very, honestly grateful. I thankfully, my work has always gotten better because people have, helped and been part of the process. So it makes me very, very grateful for the teams that I've been a part of. I'm touch wood, I've been very lucky that I've been with really, really wonderful writers and working with really wonderful people. So it kind of makes you realize that there's really a camaraderie to it. I think funny enough, at Illinois Wesleyan, my thesis was on how can you consider a script a final piece of art? And you really learn as you work more and more in the industry that this is really a blueprint, and it's both amazing to see what other people create off of it. It was really fun. It's always fun to go to set and be like, you created this whole monster because of one sentence I wrote in my script. That's kind of amazing. But then it's also really gratifying to be like, oh, this had to come together with a group of people. You really, get a sense of, oh, wow, the sound design, the editing, the lighting, the costumes, the acting, everything makes your story, hopefully better. And there's something just very, very I don't know, kind of heartwarming a little bit about it, that everyone put this much effort into something you just kind of sat down one day and wrote. You were hired to write it, but there's something really lovely about that.
Yeah. I love that answer. So can you tell my students a little bit about maybe not even what the industry is like, because you've been explaining that as you go, but how did you get into it? How difficult was it for you to get into it?
yeah, these are the questions that I'm like, I'm so sorry. These are not going to be the funnest answers because there's really no.
Those are the most honest and most helpful answers, though. The ones that are like, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's kind of hard. It's interesting because I think this is pretty well known. Unlike other, industries, this one has no set avenue, which in a way can be good because that means you really can, you don't have to do a certain, you don't have to be locked into, oh, you have to go to grad school, you have to do this, you have to do this. But at the same time, that means there's no set path. So it's kind of like you really have, you can try a path that has worked for another person and it doesn't work for you. You can try 20 paths that have worked for 20 other people and it doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
So it's not easy. It's very not easy. Even when I was in NYU, and this is really, I'm really not trying, I'm using these figures just to kind of give an example because this is the best way I know how to do it.
Yeah.
But like my class at NYU had I think it was like a 9 or 11% acceptance rate. And so you've already culled quite a few people when you get to that point.
Yeah.
From that 9 or 11%, we were already told when we were going in, you're like, maybe 50-40% of you are going to actually have a career. Like that's just the shape of it. It's unfortunately there's only so many voices that get produced. There's only so many people that get paid.
Yeah.
So to have a continuous career is hard. The way that, so to give a little bit of example, I went through grad school, but what really helped me was I was able to write a feature script that got on a short list of NYU's of like, hey, here are the best feature scripts coming out of the program. That landed me a manager. So representation essentially. And my manager was the one who was like, you wrote this cute little indie drama. That's nice. How about we get you into horror? Essentially trying to find a way to put me, frankly, just make me more, interesting as to buyers, to people who would be, buying things. And the funny thing is like, so I've been writing probably since I was like 7 or 8. By that time, I got a manager. I had 2 degrees in writing. I had finished one of the more prestigious or more, hard to get into, grad film programs in the country. And it took me at least 4 more years of writing scripts to get paid. So that's like the length of what you're looking at when it comes to how long it could take to actually make this a career. Yeah. And that alone is just, it stops a lot of people. It's very hard to keep going when you don't have that, when it takes that long to jumpstart something and it's all you. It's those 4 years, I lived in a shitty apartment. I was doing like catering on the side. I was doing like, office work, to pay bills and stuff. I got very lucky that I had, and this is something I will say again, little soapboxy. I had help because my parents helped me with rent. A lot of the people in the industry, they tend to come from, upper class area, like, families and such, because they can afford it. They can afford to have that help and security while they try to, continue working for free or for very little money. I'd like to say we're trying to do better in the industry to make it so that it's more equal. I don't know how I think it's a slow process, but it's something that I think at least the industry is aware of now. Mm-hmm. So I had to write, I think, I'm trying to think, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 to 5 feature scripts before I was hired to write anything. So that's kind of, again, these are the like sadder kind of parts of the industry, but truly the thing that helped me was writing so much. I wrote so much, I rewrote, and I got myself to a point of writing caliber that people were interested in finally. So that got me to a point of where if someone hired me to write a feature for them, and then from there, they were like, hey, we heard you're really good and we like these other things you've done. We're going to hire you to work on this project. And it just kept going. It, as soon as the process started, thankfully, it just didn't stop. It just got, it got built up and built up and built up to the point where now I'm not worried about not getting another job. I've done enough work and I have enough of a background I will say I still write my own stuff. Like I haven't stopped, the process it's the same now as it was 10 years ago. I sit here, I have a blank page, and I write something new for no one but me, and we'll see if anyone likes it. That's kind of that part of the process never goes away. And it's the only way to keep yourself valuable to this industry, honestly, is to show that, like, hey, I'm still coming up with new stuff, and I'm still good at this, guys.
Yeah.
I feel like I answered your question, but I don't know actually if I answered your question.
No, I think you did. I have a follow-up, but yeah, you did answer my question. When you said you wrote like 4 or 5 scripts before you finally got notice, like somebody took notice of what you were doing, were you submitting those scripts places, or what does that look like? Because I know that for like poets and short story and novelist people, I know that the whole game is just submitting, getting rejected a million times until finally something, like you said, your caliber is finally up enough that people take notice. So were you submitting those scripts places, or what does that look like for a filmmaker?
So at that point, I a little bit, but not a ton, because I had a manager, and so I should explain. Writers and directors and a lot of creative people in the industry will have representation, and that representation will essentially be their microphones, their megaphones into the industry. So any work that I was creating, I was giving to my manager, and my manager was then sending it out to like producers, industry executives, being like, hey, meet this person, her work is cool. Yeah. I should say, over those 4 years, I did have a lot of meetings. Like you do kind of, to get to a little more granular, if you do get representation, that representation, either be an agent or a manager, I'm happy to talk about the differences between those two if it's helpful. They should be sending you out to meet with people, and then those people are going to be excited about your work. They're going to keep you in mind. They're going to talk to other people about you. The idea being that my first 4 scripts were more starting to become calling cards of like, we like this person, we think she writes well, we want to possibly hire her to, develop this, feature idea we have into maybe a script, or we, want her to be in this room that we're creating for like a horror show or something. So I tended to use my scripts at that point for visibility of me into the industry. And that is that's one of the things that you will start to do if you write a bunch and you get representation, or if you get someone interested in you. The first thing that tends to happen is you start to meet a lot of people. You start to meet executives, you start to meet producers who might not have something for you at that moment, but you're building relationships. It's a very small kind of world, actually, and you start to get to know people very quickly. So that's kind of what I was doing for the 4 years that I was writing, is I was kind of building my circle, the people who knew me. Yeah. And I will say, I've known a lot of people who have gone through those programs and have been really successful. I will say most of the production companies and networks have what they call, what do they call them? Labs. They are not labs, but like they'll have a program specifically for new writers. Those I've heard are very successful, actually. So there's Nickelodeon has one, Universal has one, Warner Brothers has one, HBO has one. I'm pretty sure NBC, ABC, and those networks have them as well. What they are is, hey, you've never staffed on a show. We really like your work. We're going to put you in a I do believe these are usually based in Los Angeles, but they give you a stipend. They work with you on how to be a writer. And then the really great thing is most of these programs will then will actually pay for these, the graduates of these programs to be on shows within their network. So usually the way it works is if a show is hiring writers, obviously the salary of those writers are coming from the show's budget. The really nice thing about these writers who are coming from these programs is they're free to the show. So they almost always get paired with a show, which means it's a very clear track to getting a career as a TV writer. Yeah. So if that's something that you like, that any of your students or feel is really interesting to them, I would really recommend either going that route or just looking for programs and contests that are very specifically, they're not, I would never do a cash prize one. Those are, they're just like lotteries that it doesn't really help you. I would 100% look for programs that are specifically doing things to advance your career. If that means that they're putting you in a lab that'll help you, that'll help you get a direct job as an assistant or a writer on a show, or if it's gonna get you representation or something, those are the kind of programs that I would say those are actually way more beneficial. And the programs that are specifically being led by production companies, by studios, by networks tend to be better than the ones that are just independent, kind of things. The one that I would say is maybe an anomaly is there's something called the Nickel Fellowships, which is actually run by the Academy of Film Arts and Sciences, the people who do the Oscars. So that's another one that's very well received and people really like it. So if that is an avenue that does work, it's hard. I would say I could easily apply to one of those today and not get in. Because there's just a lot of competition. So it's one of those things of like, yeah, in 4 years, apply 4 times. This is really a process of continuously trying to make that break into the industry.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned that maybe you could talk about the distinction between, I forget what you said, managers and other agents.
Yeah. So it's funny because there's a running joke in Hollywood that like, well, what is the distinction? Why do people have both of them? And so I will give the best to my ability. I do have both now. I started with a manager. I really loved, and I will say this is very, very subjective to people. I've known tons of people who hated having managers and agents. I've known people who've absolutely loved having an agent, hated having a manager, whatever. I started with a manager, and it's much more common to start with managers because I will say very quickly, the legal definition, but distinction between the two is a manager is someone who can represent you, who can share your work with people, who can like work with you on your work as well as produce it. So a manager can actually come on board and be like, I love your feature script. I'm going to send it to a bunch of people, but I also want to attach myself as a producer. So my manager currently is attached to produce one of my feature films. Legally, they are allowed to do that. Agents are actually not allowed to do that. They cannot attach themselves to anything that you write. They cannot attach themselves as a producer. They can only be your liaison between the person who will be working with you, and they can only be like a middleman essentially. I don't know why that is. There's a reason. There's a very big legal reason for it. Usually agents will be, as far as my experience has gone, they tend to be more helpful later in your career. When you're just starting out, managers tend to be a little more helpful because managers tend to have less clients and they really focus on your growth as a creator. So my manager, or they should be at least, my manager has really looked at, hey, where do you really want to go? What are the things you want to do? So for example, when I started and I liked horror, we focused on horror, but then, I talked to her and said, look, I really want to do other things. I want to do dark stuff. I want to do fantasy stuff, but I want to do I just want to run the gamut. And she really changed course, and we have really changed my career path to make sure that I don't just stay in horror. So that's actually, when we were talking about it earlier, yes, a lot of it had to do with the creative stuff, the stuff I was creating, but it also had to do with my manager, who was very good about putting me up for things and getting me in front of people who were not just doing horror. She and I together helped shape that part of my career.
Yeah.
She reads every draft I write. She gives notes on everything. She's pretty much involved in both creative and business decisions. And for the longest time, up until a month ago, she and my team was her. I have a lawyer who negotiates my contracts, and that was it. And we worked together to get me contracts, to get me work, to get me meetings. And I've loved that. That was a really good relationship. Recently, I have taken on a team of agents there's 3 large agencies essentially in this industry, WME, CAA, and UTA. My agents are at WME. Agents can be really helpful to get you work, to like specifically, hey, I'm going to put your script out to like 50 shows, and they're very much more specifically, they'll have many more clients, and they're not going to give you the same kind of guidance necessarily and like look over your career as much as a manager will.
Right.
They will be much more focused on, we need to get you this job, we need to negotiate it, done. It depends on your relationship with your agent. You can have like different, like people will have different relationships. These are very like personal kind of things too. Like people tend to, I mean, like I've gone on vacations with my manager. So like, you know, you tend to start getting, because you're with them for a while, you know, like if they're good at what they do, you'll be with them for decades possibly. So my one of the reasons that I brought on a team of agents is I've started doing a lot of creating my own shows and creating my own work that I'm not going to necessarily be hired for. Someone's going to hire me to make these things. And so because of that, it helps to get an agent on your team that's from one of these agencies, because they have access to a million directors, a million, producers, because they are attached to these larger companies that represent, thousands of people. They're able to then come in and be like, oh, it's not just your agent that you've now hired a whole team of, hey, you have a script that needs a Black actor who's in his mid 40s, 50s, who, is really good at comedy, but also like drama. We have 10 people we can show you. So it tends to help, I think, at a later part in your career where you've established yourself, you've gotten a few jobs under your belt, and you now are at a place where you're actually kind of really creating yourself as a company. Like you're really thinking of yourself as not just one project at a time. You're thinking in the future of like many projects, who you need for certain things. So that's really what my team at my team of agents are doing now, is they're actually helping me find writers for the show that I might be running. And that's, so they're not even just like they're reading my work, they're sending my work out. But the bigger thing is that they're helping to support the projects that I'm already on with all of the people that they are connected to in their own company. So it can be beneficial. I would never say you need both. I was very reluctant to take both, to be honest. I was very happy with my manager. I had to kind of be cajoled into taking on agents because it costs money. They take a percentage of your salary. So managers and agents respectively take 10% each. Lawyers take 5%. So a quarter of my salary will just be gone. The idea being that they are, supplying you with enough value that's worth it. Hopefully, yeah.
But they're getting you more work than you could have gotten on your own. Therefore, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I will say I would have gotten 0 jobs. Every single job I've had has been through my representation at some point. So it would be, it would be wrong of me to say that they aren't valuable. They're incredibly valuable.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that answer. That was illuminating. Like I did not know any of that. That's awesome.
It's very confusing. So if anyone's confused, you're like all the rest of us.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and my students wanted to know what your like favorites and least favorite parts of your career are. Like, what's the best and the worst parts of your career?
That's tough. This is sort of answering the question indirectly, but I think a lot of people think when you get into something like this that it's like a dream come true and it's amazing. And I do want to emphasize, this is still a job. Like I sort of jokingly tell people, like when they're like, "Oh, why did you decide to do this?" I say, because I hate everything else more. Like, and I know that's like a very dark way to put it.
I love it.
but it's hard like a job. It's boring like other jobs sometimes. It is frustrating and tedious like other jobs. This is a very weird reference to make, but if anyone's watched the Pixar movie Soul, like you'll understand. Like you can get your dream job and realize like, oh, this isn't really dreamlike. This is just normal life. And that really is what it feels like after a while. Like I'm sitting in an office at a computer. Millions of people sit in offices in front of computers. So I just want to preface by saying like at the end of the day, this is still a career job, and and there's that feeling of that like with a lot of other places. Having said that, I'd be kind of a butt if I said there wasn't like obviously a real joy that I get to create as my living. Like that's a huge thing that I love to do. I guess my favorite part is that it keeps changing. I don't, it's very rare that I do the same thing for longer than like 5-6 months. I'm constantly working on another project. I'm constantly working on a new show. I'm constantly doing something else, or I'm working on a new season of a show, which will be different. So it's the constant change is kind of, I like it. I think that's very much a preference thing. And I like that I'm not doing the same thing every time. And new things means you have to, and I'm sure you know this too as a writer, like being a writer means you kind of have to learn other things. And that's actually kind of really fun. So I like, having to learn about car mechanics at times. I like having to learn about like the history of Russia in the 17th century. I like learning other things. And so it's nice when you have to change your focus so many times that you get to actually change also what you get to learn. So that's really, really nice. And funny enough, I guess my least favorite thing is also that it changes. There's, practically, now that I have a mortgage, now that we have a kid coming, there's a very real practical thing in this industry that you just have to be okay with is at every level, you could stop having jobs. I know because every job only lasts so long, I have to get another one. So I don't know. And I really will say, I don't know if it's my least favorite thing. I think it's the most stressful thing is that you have to worry about that you have to, you truly have to know, like, one of my shows is ending in a couple weeks. So that means that the very nice paycheck I've been getting every week is going to stop. Like, here's hoping that another one comes in a few months, but it's very much peaks and valleys in this career. And so you could go, there's plenty of writers I know who go a year to 18 months without a single paycheck. So you have to be prepared for that with whatever you got before that time. Is that my least favorite thing? Probably not. I think my least favorite thing is also that you're a commodity. Like at the end of the day, you are very much at the hands of whatever I want to give, whatever I want to send out in the world. There will be someone in between me and that process that has decided a financial reason as to whether or not I get to do that. So that's kind of a bummer that, there's probably a lot of stories that you guys could hear and a lot of really interesting work that would be fascinating to a lot of people that you just don't get because people just don't want to make it. And this industry is getting unfortunately smaller and smaller as far as what content it's willing to produce. So that's a bummer, but hopefully we're changing with new platforms, with new ways of getting work out to people. I hope that that's going to, become a little less of a struggle.
Yeah. Such a bummer. You're right. There are like so many amazing stories that we could be listening to or watching or reading. Somebody decided it wasn't economically feasible, so we don't get it. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is same with novels. My God. Same with so many forms of writing.
Yeah. Same with novels. Same with poetry. Like, I know. So you can have managers and agents, and novelists often have literary agents. If you're a poet, like agents aren't a thing. Like you're waiting.
Really?
Yeah, there's not really an agent for poets unless you're like really far along in your career. The way you break in is like you get lucky and win some fucking contest. Oops. Like it's pretty. Yeah. You submit enough places that somebody decides that they want to offer you to publish a manuscript, but you don't usually have an agent when you're a poet. It's very strange.
That is strange.
It's like a weird academia thing. Like poetry is still sort of enmeshed in the realm of academia. A lot of academic presses will be first poets like publications and stuff like that. It's weird. It's a little staunch.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and like doing it yourself or self-publishing. In other industries, it's becoming less and less taboo. I'm noticing, like, especially in like the music industry, like putting out your own album is like people do that all the time. It's becoming less and less taboo for novelists, especially in certain genres, to self-publish. But for poets, it's still seen as like you're just killing your career if you self-publish.
Wow.
It's very strange. It's like latent. It's like the last thing to join the party.
That's fascinating. I think that there should be more avenues for poetry too, because there is, there should be a column in every paper. There should be, like a spot in most magazines. I don't understand why there would,
Yeah, because it's so short, right? It takes up such little space. I do know some people who like they do something interesting on Instagram and they like get snapped up because they're trendy. So there's this poet, I think her name is Kate Bear. She's on maybe like her third poetry manuscript in the last like book coming out like the last 3 years. And it's because she's doing something interesting on Instagram. So there are like weird niche ways, but otherwise, it's very strange.
This actually, this is fascinating because I feel like this is going to be a time where poetry might start to shine because people have wanted shorter and shorter forms of things.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Start a TikTok, Kathy.
Yeah. All right, I'll do it. And all of my free time. Anyway, cool. Thank you so much, Sehaj. This was so wonderful. So good to hear about all of the amazing things that you know and have experienced now in your career. And thank you so much for answering my students' questions. You've been so helpful.
Absolutely. This has been a joy. So it's been a pleasure for me as well. So I hope I was helpful and not just rambling. There's a very good chance that it was a little bit of both.
No, it was mostly helpful. I would say 90%.
That's good. I'll take that.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Bye.